California, not to mention rich people's houses. Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst. So, just wondering, where the hell are our leaders? The country is in the grip of a climate catastrophe, a disaster that has descended particularly hard on Texas. And where was the junior senator from Texas, that great moral philosopher and constitutional scholar, Cruz, who prefers that we call him Ted? Oh, Senator Rabb was on his way to Cancun for a family vacation. I'm sure you've heard this. In Texas, many of his constituents were trapped in their homes without power, heat, or even clean water. But hey, it was 84 degrees in Cancun. How could he resist? The dereliction here is breathtaking. So bad, even Fox News couldn't stand it. In case you can't read that smaller headline under the one saying Ted Cruz flew to Cancun amid a Texas power crisis, it says millions in Texas without power, at least 30 dead. What were you thinking, Senator? Abandoning your post in the midst of a crisis. Now remember, this isn't only a natural disaster. This is a failure of government. The state government of Texas, to be very specific. The Republican-run state government of Texas, to be even more specific. They run the power. They run the power grid in Texas, and for a generation have kept it separate from the rest of the national power supply. God bless that sovereign state of Texas. I wish I could heap all my scorn just on Senator Cruz, but I expect that Republicans to act like government doesn't matter. That's what they do. To act like going Cancun makes sense in the midst of a crisis. That is the epitome of their philosophy and their campaigning since Reagan. Undermine and starve government until it fails, and then argue for smaller government and privatize the rest while their donor pals collect no-bid contracts. Hello, Texas. The power grid is failing because you failed to look after it, because you starved it, because you killed it. I wish I could just blame Ted Cruz and his band of Texas Republicans right now. But honestly, where is President Biden? This is at least as big as Katrina or Sandy. Homeless on the streets, freezing. People don't have access to water. And FEMA hasn't sent food and blankets. And they sent just a few generators. That barely feels better than Trump throwing paper towels to Puerto Ricans after Hurricane Maria. This is a moment that President Biden should seize to help rebuild the faith in the purpose and the capacity of the government to help people. I get that his administration is going to be, more low-key than the last, but we still need to hear from the president in moments of crisis. And this is a moment of crisis, not just for the people of Texas, but for every one of us, because this is the future if we don't start responding. And we've been saying that since Hurricane Sandy, since Hurricane Katrina. How many hurricanes? How many tornadoes? How many earthquakes? How many fires? How many houses need to fall into the ocean? How many floods? The power grid failed because it was never built for extreme weather of climate change. And because the Republican state government for 30 years didn't take care of it or prepare for what was coming. I'm glad that the United States is rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. Diplomacy is lovely. But this is reality smacking us in the face like an ice storm. Because it is an ice storm, where it should not be. I'm sure the White House wishes this reckoning with the climate crisis was a year from now, after they'd passed their pandemic rescue package and the rest of their 100 days wish list, after everybody is vaccinated. But as they say, life is what happens while you're making plans. The president still needs to deliver the $1.9 trillion rescue package. He still needs to get everyone the vaccine. But his agenda accelerated this week on the climate front. Not like we didn't know that was coming. The White House needs to face it and respond now, while everyone is paying attention, not later when nobody cares. I know it's cold out, but this is no time to be frozen in place politically. You need to show the world what happens with failed Republican ideas. And this is several failures in one. Their denial of climate change, their addiction to fossil fuels and to the campaign cash of the fossil fuel industry, their refusal to invest in a resilient electric infrastructure, their belief that the market can fix everything by magic, and their absolute alternate reality in dealing with this. Mr. President, make it a learning experience for the country. You might even win over some Republicans who are frozen right now. You can at least start by schooling Ted Cruz. God knows he has it coming. And Governor Abbott, who would rather blame windmills than his own party for this calamity. Be a leader, President Biden. Explain what it will take to address this. Show us that this isn't Trump's America anymore. Show us we have a president with an attention span longer than Sean Hannity's show. Show us that bipartisanship isn't about being nice. It's about being real. Show us all how to rise above Twitter and Fox News and MSNBC so we can solve what may be the most complicated challenge the country will be facing, is facing, the climate crisis. Right now, you should head down to Texas. I don't buy the idea that your presence will interfere with recovery efforts. By the way, that was the excuse that both Donald Trump's fans said and George W. Bush's. But if you'd rather, send Vice President Harris. She was a senator from California who just last year, the power grid, of course, crumbled under an extreme weather event. So surely she understands this challenge. We will all need to understand this challenge. And it is your responsibility now, Mr. President, to make sure of it. It is your responsibility to speak up. The fact that you haven't on the third day of this crisis says a lot. There is no time for freezing, literally freezing, being politically frozen and freezing because of the climate crisis. You have to do something. The least you can do is do an address before the country and talk about these issues, and then get on a plane or have Vice President Harris get on a plane and go respond. It is not a distraction having you there. If anything, the cameras will all focus. Every single cable news show will focus on what you say and how eager and urgent addressing climate change is in your administration. We have a terrific show for you today. We have Rabb, Representative Rabb here, and so is Arun Chaudhary to talk about this week's news, a lot of it. And right after the break, we will have the one and only Professor Harvey Kaye, who is, of course, the biographer of Thomas Paine and FDR, and an expert on, I'd say, leaders dealing with crises. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Of course, straight out of the Nomiki Show chat. That's what he's known for on this show. We have Professor Harvey Kaye. He was a former professor emeritus, I should say, at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, and he is an author who is the author of Thomas Paine and the Promise of America, which was one of our book club options. And he's also the author of The Fight for Four Freedoms, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, FDR and Democracy, and I think like 14 books in total, if that's correct. Am I wrong?
What number did you just say? 14?
Well, 17, I think.
Oh, excuse me.
No, you asked me.
No, I know. All right.
I'm not to piss you off today. I'm not going to do that again.
So, Let's talk about this crisis. We have a crisis in leadership, I believe. I think, my opening, I don't know if you had a chance to see it. To me, this is such a revealing moment. I think the least that Biden could do right now, and I don't want to put all the attention on Biden, of course, Ted Cruz getting on a flight to Cancun and the Republicans creating this disaster. Yes. But I mean, it would be really nice if we had like Democrats calling that out, not just like the media on the internet. If we had like, Joe Biden, our actual president, who's to give a speech. I mean, the least he could do is give a speech.
Or how about Chris Christie calling him out? Do you remember Chris Christie went to the beach when nobody else was supposed to?
Of course. I do remember being there for Sandy. No, but I mean, the reality is it's so egregious what we're seeing. To me, this is such a metaphor for our political state. You have a Republican Party that is just so incredibly out of touch and self-obsessed. I mean, this is beyond narcissism. Ted Cruz is revealing himself to be a sociopath. The fact that he thought not just that it was okay to go to Cancun, but that nothing would happen. No one would care. No one would catch him. Just in the middle of this crisis. So that's the Republicans, right? And then you have Joe Biden, frozen. What a metaphor for the moment we're living in. Have you seen anything like this before?
Well, I'll start off with my silly observation for the day. My first silly observation is, I think Ted Cruz knows they've discovered his role in the insurrection in Washington, and he's leaving the country before they catch up with him. That's one possibility. But on a more serious note, I don't know how many of the folks who are with us right now saw the Milwaukee town hall on Tuesday night, Monday night, the one on CNN.
Tuesday night, I believe. Yeah.
And, it was amazing to me. It wasn't exactly frozen, but it was amazing to me that the most telling moment was when they asked, it was a young man or woman asked about student debt. And he figured he was going to show how maybe it was going to be his Bill Clinton Sister Soldier moment or something, right? Where he says to her, 10,000, right? And he makes a remark about, well, basically what he's saying is, I don't want to be responsible for clearing the debts of people who went to Harvard and Yale. I'm not even sure people quite understood what he was probably trying to do at that moment. I think that was his populist moment almost. I mean, ultimately what I was going to say is that you're looking very skeptically. And my point ultimately is that it was a terrible town hall, a terrible one. The only time that the liberal media had something to really grab hold of was when he said they were going to go big. This was not the time. That's after he told the student, we're not going to go higher than $10,000 on the question of student debt. So once again, it's a moment where, and I think I've said this to you before, what Biden is really good at is contradictions, maybe even contradicting himself along the way. And clearly, he's not leading right now. I think we're 30 days into this administration, right?
Just about
30 days. And if people think in terms of 100 days, so like what are we? We're 30% along the way. And I don't think anybody feels like we're anything more than an interregnum right now.
I mean, this is, I know people are like, well, what did you expect? It's Joe Biden. He's a neoliberal. It's not that we didn't expect. We know who Joe Biden is. We know he's been partnering with the fracking industry, and the Democratic Party is just completely drowning in fossil fuel money. We understand who he is. We understand the resistance. I mean, I know because I was on the platform committee. We know the resistance the Democratic Party has to getting off of their donors' money, which is holding up legislation, really transformative legislation that could save this country and potentially this world. We get that. The difference is he's just absent. It's not like, okay, I'm going to give a very weird example given this moment because of the scandal he's in, but you know who's really good? I'm not saying that, listen, I disagree with him. If anybody knows anything about me, I'm no fan of Andrew Cuomo, but he's really good at not being absent. So he makes people, and it's been very effective in his career thus far, in that the state is on, literally falling apart. Yep. And he comes out and he's just he's there. He shows up and he makes this certain section of folks feel better. I'm not saying that's what Biden does, but I'm like, where is he? What is he doing? You know, I'm not asking you to say we're getting off fossil fuels tomorrow. I don't expect that, I should say. I am asking him to do it. He's not going to, I don't expect him to do this. But the least he could do is give a speech on Texas right now from the Oval Office, or have Kamala Harris do it, and just point fingers at the Republicans in Texas. That's the least. They lose nothing out of that. And yet, nothing.
Okay, apparently he's had a series of meetings. Now, this is the part of the problem of lack of leadership. He's having a series of meetings with labor people and business people and others, and sometimes mixed groups of labor and business people. And he may be under the assumption that he only has to speak behind closed doors. But basically what he says will come out beyond the closed doors. So, for example, I've heard from any number of people in labor that, in fact, he's making overtures in meetings that are indicating his commitment to labor. However, in a meeting the other day, apparently, which may well have included labor and social movements other than labor, maybe perhaps even environmental groups, and there was a sense in the meeting, that he was not going to go in the green direction. In other words, having told the labor people national infrastructure was really important to him and they were going to go big on that, he apparently tended to down, he sort of kept his distance from any kind of green kind of direction. I'm using that in a sort of grand metaphorical sense. The other thing is, this is really, really, really bugging me, is that if you're going to be a leader in the United States, and I'm now thinking back to the likes, obviously, of FDR. Everyone listening knows of my fascination for FDR and my work on FDR. One thing FDR did is he knew how to speak to Americans even before he took action in order to encourage Americans to expect big things. And he didn't just say, we're going to go big, okay? He didn't do that. What he did is he laid out a series of, you can call it an agenda, but some kind of vision. And right now, and I did hear, I think I was listening to most of what you said before I came on, and that is that why not be out front right now? And instead of just saying to people behind closed doors or in a town hall, we're going to go big, why not actually lay out the project? Lay out the project and indicate what that might well entail. That's first of all. And the other thing we can come back to it is they're sort of traumatized right now, the Democrats, out of fear of cinema and Manchin. And I think, I think they've got to learn how not to fear them, but to call their bluff, right?
Yes. I mean, listen, it's absolutely incredible to me that two senators could put so much fear into the president of the United States. Can you imagine Johnson being frozen by two senators, and frankly, the country? I mean, how would Johnson have dealt with this? I know that's not necessarily, you're not a scholar of Johnson, but
I'll say exactly how he would have dealt with this. He would have invited them to the White House, probably not a woman necessarily in the sense he would have invited her, but he might not have done to her what he would easily be happy to do to Manchin. Although I assume Manchin is probably a fairly large guy, but Johnson would literally back you into a wall and twist your arm, probably with the indication that you don't do it, I'll break your arm. But he did something else as well. He could make promises. He knew how, because he had been a senator who had been, if you like, an apprentice in Congress to FDR, he also knew how to make deals. And what I don't get is this. I mean, actually, in this vein, I want to say something about Biden that is really worrisome. And I think we talked about this some months ago, when he always seems to be more willing to raise his voice to progressives, to go arrogant towards progressives, and always sort of, not, if not physically, metaphorically, reach out to Republicans, to reach out to the right. And as a consequence right now, I can imagine this moment where he's going to go on TV and like that thing the other night at the town hall where a young person was obviously looking for some indicator that he's going to go above 10,000. And he was more ready to tell her we're only going to go to 10,000. But it's like, is he more primed to be antagonistic to the left?
Yeah.
And welcoming to the right. And that's worrisome too about leadership, by the way, at this moment in this crisis, where, I mean, this crisis is a crisis upon a crisis upon a crisis.
Yes. And I think, I mean, I want to clarify one point. I don't think it's about acquiescing or being more likely to work with the right. I think it's that it's about elites, aka senators, and working people. I didn't look at that woman like I didn't know if she's progressive or not. I think she just is buried in student loan debt. And she's just thinking, how do I survive in the middle of all these crises when I still have to cut a check for student loans or they're coming to get me and I might lose my house and I might go default to my credit card, go into bankruptcy over all my other debts, but I can't it's because I have to pay for my student debts first. So to me, it reminded me, it was cruel. It was cruel how he responded. And it reminded me of when Bill Clinton got into a few altercations in 2008 with Hillary Clinton when she ran, and also in 2016. There was one in particular with a veteran, I think it was at a diner, and he was just a veteran approached him and he would not give up and he was debating him and he was basically like, you don't know what you're talking about. And I mean, and then of course with Black Lives Matter activists, but there's a cruelty. And what it revealed to me was these are not people who are willing to work with the Republic. These are elitists. They're willing to work with the elites. They're willing to cut deals with elites that they know. I mean, I think that Biden would sit down with Bernie Sanders because Bernie Sanders is still part of his little elite Senate circle. Just as much as, obviously he's going to partner with others, but.
Yeah. Well, let's try to imagine for a moment what it would be if he were going to try to disprove our sense of him. Okay. Because I think your reference to his inability to engage working people, in spite of his being, by the way, he was supposed to be, Joe from Scranton, Sarah Nelson makes it clear, rhetorically speaking, he is the most pro-labor president that we can probably remember, rhetorically speaking. But to be truly engaging of working people, here's what he could have done, okay? So, for example, had they allowed someone in the audience to ask, what's your position on the labor movement going forward? Or even whatever it might be, they could have said, do you have any idea as to how your administration is going to address inequality? Something that could empower him to say this. He could have said, I think that every worker who has an opportunity to join a labor union should. Straight out. Now, and by the way, he's pretty much said behind closed doors he's committed to labor. The trick is for him to say it on national television. Let people know where his administration is going to stand. Don't tell labor union leaders who already have membership. Tell people who want a union, okay? That's key. FDR back in the 30s, whether he said this directly or not, basically enabled the AFL to issue posters that said, if I worked in a factory, I'd join a union. Okay. His own wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, joined a union when she started writing a column for, forget the name of the women's magazine, but she started writing a column for them in addition to others. She joined the Journalists Guild, which was a labor union, probably a fairly progressive labor union given the 30s. This family of the Roosevelts, the husband and wife together, they sent signals to people as to the kinds of things they hoped Americans would do, because FDR and Eleanor, but especially FDR, the president, knew the more Americans got organized, the more empowered he would be. And indeed, at this point, do we know if Joe Biden, any more than Barack Obama, any more than Bill Clinton, any more than Jimmy Carter, really has, if you like, a kind of faith, a confidence, and a commitment to working people beyond leave it to us. We'll take care of everything. And they didn't take care of anything.
And then simultaneously, because we're talking about this crisis with climate, the climate community, climate activist community, and the labor community haven't always gotten along for a lot of different reasons, preserving jobs in industries that go against, that exacerbate climate change. And there's some unions, but I think they're starting to warm up. And I mean, obviously that's why the Green New Deal is so smart. But I feel like this is partly why Biden's frozen. I'm not entirely sure, but this is. I mean, ultimately, I've said this before on the show that the Democratic Party, time and time again, rules by committee. They're slow to respond to things because they have to go back to their when I say constituencies, I don't mean their constituents. I mean their donors and their little lobbyist people who are in their ears and try to come up with the best way out. But 3, 4, 5 days, a week later is not leadership. And, we saw that after COVID when it's hard to remember a year back, believe it or not, but there was a slow response by the Biden campaign to the pandemic, if you recall. Meanwhile, again, Andrew Cuomo just got on TV. He didn't know what he was talking. Clearly,
he was doing a hell of a job, Andrew. Yep. He even as he's lying about one thing, he's out on TV pretending he's going to be the next president of the United States because he can take the leadership on COVID.
Yes. I'm not saying you pull a Cuomo, but he didn't care about I guess he just has an internal sense of what his constituencies, his donors want. So it didn't really matter. But this is such a problem. This money in the Democratic Party, the conflicts of interest in the party, the reason why I keep bringing this up over and over again, why I literally took bullets for it and was smeared for it and attacked for it and all the different, is because this is the moment when those people are strangling our leaders. It's not just because we can't get certain agenda items passed. It's because now we can't get anything passed because 2 or 3 interests are circling around Manchin and Sinema and figuring out this is their way to hold it up. It doesn't matter if you won the Senate. It doesn't matter if we literally spent $1 billion getting Joe Biden elected and several hundreds of millions getting Ossoff and Warnock elected. But now these interests, just like they don't let any reforms happen that are significant enough in the Democratic Party and it's questionably legal, they still, to make sure that Joe Biden's elected, now they're here doing it it reminds me of these fiscal control boards, whether it's in Detroit or Puerto Rico or back in New York in what was it, the 70s or 80s, whatever it was. They just, you have all this democracy. You could have a legislature and a governor and you could, you could have a city council. You have all this democracy, pass these bills that reform things and are really going to change the landscape of the city or the island or wherever. And then a fiscal control board, which is completely appointed, oversees it and usually reflects some sort of corporate Wall Street interest. And then they're just like, that's so cute. Now we're in charge. And that's how the Democratic Party is run. And that's how we get Joe Biden as the nominee. And that's how we get Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema holding. It's procedural holdups because the people in charge of those procedures are the unelected corporate segments of the population. I just think this is such a bad point. I think this is a really big moment right now. I think this is, if this is the way the Biden administration is going to be run, I mean, what do you think that this is I don't want to say the Katrina moment, but.
Well, I mean, in terms of what's going on in the South, look, I mean, it's interesting to live in Wisconsin and see Wisconsin-like conditions strike the South and seriously to see, that third of the nation be utterly devastated by all of this. And then to have the governor of Texas tell us that it was the wind turbines, which only represent 10% of all of the power there. And he couldn't bother to mention that the gas lines froze too. I mean, it's all that kind of stuff. So, okay, look, I think right now, Joe Biden's presidency is not the Democratic Party's hold on Congress is hanging in the balance. And the only thing that may save them is the utter incompetence, the fact that it's Texas led by Republicans. But, all of that aside, I want Democrats, Biden included, or Harris. Let Harris do it. I mean, hell, she was a dogged, state attorney general, district attorney, all those kinds of things. Let these people go on the warpath right now in favor of the $15 an hour minimum wage in terms of the pandemic. Okay. Instead, they're going to be marked as having been the ones who were willing to defend $1,400 when they promised to get Ossoff and Warnock, the people you just mentioned, elected in Georgia. Call in Manchin and say, we're calling your bluff. Let Schumer say, hey, we're calling your bluff. You two want to block $15 an hour minimum wage, which won't even go into effect for like 4 to 5 years on a full scale basis. You got to look back. You go back to West Virginia and find out how your constituents feel about this. That's what I mean. Call the bluff. Okay.
Well, here, just on the Schumer point, I'm like, everyone's like, look at Schumer. He's moving progressive on all these issues. I mean, even internally in New York, I've been watching some like community board meetings that he's attended, and he's leaned in more progressive. But at the end of the day, I want to see Schumer strong arm Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. That's all great. I'm really happy he's pushing for $50,000 elimination of student debt. Fantastic. I don't know how realistic it is. Maybe it's just posturing. Exactly. Yeah. Maybe, all these other things that he's doing is posturing because he's a very skilled politician, but I don't care. I want you, Senate Majority Leader Schumer, my first internship, to strong arm Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, because that's what you're supposed to do. You're the boss now.
Yeah. I just want to say, and this is a sidebar that's relevant. Okay. So today, Ayanna Pressley and her team have announced a bill for a guaranteed federal job. Okay. And that, by the way, must be talked about. They must line up a lot of, if you like, folks to support it, promote it, because it is so popular an idea among both Democrats and Republicans alike. And even if it's not part of the pandemic question, it is clearly part of the infrastructure question. So what I'm saying with that is there are Democrats with ideas and with programs. I know that Bernie's part of the circle now, okay, in a way he never has been, but I sure hope that Bernie thinks in a more parliamentary-like way at times and speaks up as the chair of the budget committee and not simply as an underling below Schumer and Biden, okay? Because if you can get people in the House and people in the Senate who want to make the case for progressive action within a pandemic initiative and within a national infrastructure, you've got to, as I've always said to you, you have got to cultivate not the base, you've got to cultivate working people's expectations and aspirations, or aspirations and expectations in that order, in order to bring pressure to bear. Let them know that you will not put up with another Obama presidency.
Harvey Kaye, you're the best.
Thanks.
Thank you for always joining us and for being my therapist.
You know that. Happy to. Thank
you.
So
the best therapy is history, in my opinion. I don't know if that's
the histories that I and my colleagues write, not just any history.
Yeah. I mean, not like Thomas Friedman's history or someone else.
Thank you.
Just want to say Invisible Queer sends a message saying, note to self, read FDR on democracy. You might have some more book sales. Professor Harvey Kaye, author of FDR on Democracy and many other books, 16 other books, I believe, if I'm correct.
Authored and edited.
Authored and edited. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Looking forward to seeing you next time.
You bet.
Stay warm.
Thank you.
All right, we will be right back with our fabulous panel, Rabb and Arun Chaudhary. Got lots to discuss. We're going to try to fit it in today because we got to cut out early today because of me. See you at the break, after the break.
To everyone who's cold right now, can I suggest you don't do that? Okay, sure. As a senator, I should do something to help the people freezing in their homes, but counterpoint, I'm drinking a margarita. Look, I get it, the timing is bad, but this trip has been on the books for like 9 days, so there's nothing I can do. To my constituents, I am listening. I will say it is difficult to hear you over the Mexican hotel singer singing John Mayer songs to make the white people more comfortable. Have you considered a conga line to warm up? I'm doing that right now and I'm honestly like kind of sweaty. This generation has gone soft. Like in my day, we wouldn't complain about losing power in the middle of a record-breaking snowstorm because that never happened to us. You just have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, chip away the ice around your bootstraps and pull them up. I'm your senator. I'm like not your dad. Excuse me? Yeah, our room thermostat has been stuck at 61 degrees and we're kind of chilly. Can you turn it up?
Rabb, you're being eliminated. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Now's the time for you to smash that like button, jump in the comments, click subscribe. Join us on Patreon, patreon.com/the Nomiki Show. You can also sign up for our book club right there. I see Arun Chaudhary. He's a political filmmaker. He's in Berlin. I know his backgrounds now. And Rabb, half of Rabb, if he's leaning in right without the no. Rabb representing the 200th district of Pennsylvania. Thanks for joining today, guys. We've got lots of stories to run through. First story that I want to talk about, because there's two stories I want to talk about with you guys, because each of you have saw these stories and I thought of you. But Rabb mentioned this one. So there's a story out right now on ABC News saying as local governments across the country take on the issues of reparations, Congress will be holding a hearing on the study of reparations on Wednesday. I know, Rabb, you got some thoughts on this. What you thinking?
Yeah, well, they had sorry about disappearing on you like this. I feel like a phantom. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you.
He's a real human.
I am.
He is real. It's not a hologram.
Yes. So I actually watched the virtual hearing on HR 40, I guess it was yesterday. And it was bizarre. So Republicans who are opposed to reparations, they found Black people who are opposed to it. And it was the most cringeworthy thing I've seen. Herschel Walker, who I was a big fan of as a boy, Heisman Trophy awardee, turned batshit crazy conservative. Well, maybe he didn't turn that way. Maybe that's how he always was. I only knew him on the football field, but it was interesting in a number of ways. One is that white Republicans and a Black Republican whose name I escapes me, probably on purpose, were trying to find ways to rationalize why reparations wasn't appropriate for Black people, even though it was appropriate for many other groups, including Japanese Americans, survivors of the Holocaust, folks who were forcibly sterilized, who were with intellectual disabilities in North Carolina, on and on and on. Reparations is not new. As I like to remind people, it is not specifically or exclusively for Black people, for slavery, nor is it definitively always a cash payment. Reparations are what we choose for what we seek to remedy, right? And it can happen, it can materialize in any number of ways. There's no one way to do it. And so it was cringeworthy, but it was also powerful because Representative Cohen from Tennessee was a very interesting ally of reparations. And to hear white people talk about reparations and why it's important, not just for a Black audience, and from a Black church, but in their job on the federal level, I think is important because, I've said previously on this show, these are conversations that white people need to have with other white people. If you talk about issues of whiteness, white privilege, structural inequality, all of these intersecting things are outgrowths of capitalism, and American capitalism as we know it is essentially what created slavery and whiteness and systemic racism. It's all connected. So you can't have a meaningful critique of capitalism without talking about reparations. You can't have anything that deals with racial disparities. Just saying racial equity is not enough. And I know you're going to be talking about student debt forgiveness. And that is one of the biggest things that that accounts for income and wealth inequality based on race. And so you can't have any of these conversations without talking about reparations. It was not well promoted in mainstream media. And particularly during Black History Month, if there was any opportunity to do it and do it right, they could have. But this is a divisive subject, as many people construe it. I don't believe it's a divisive one. I think it actually allows people to have meaningful conversations and talk about how we have a shared fate and how everyone benefits by addressing the original sin of our nation.
But it goes against the business model, obviously, of mainstream media and in many the leadership of both parties. I'm curious to think, and either one of you can jump in. You mentioned the one representative from Tennessee, but language-wise, how do you think they did in appealing to their colleagues who, I'm going to guess most of them never had a conversation or know much about reparations?
It's a starting point, and I don't know really who the real audience is. When I'm in a hearing in my Republican-controlled House of Representatives in Pennsylvania, to me, the audience is not the 15 Republican colleagues of mine out of the 25 who serve on a given committee. It's the much larger audience. It's other stakeholders, journalists, my constituents, voters. It's a much wider audience. So when I'm making my comments, I'm talking really to the camera more so than my colleagues, because if a hearing is an hour and a half, it's not a real conversation. It's just people talking, right? Scoring points most of the time. The real work is in the hallways, on the House floor, in between session days, where you're operating ideally in good faith with your colleagues who are either ignorant about a subject or resistant because they don't have the information they need to make an informed assessment of the situation. And for me, I start with Democrats because I don't have all of my Black colleagues on board with my reparations bill. I certainly don't have all of my House Democratic colleagues on board. So there's a civic literacy piece to this, why reparations matter, what it is, what it's not, and how it can help our collective kind of goals. And that work has to happen in between these hearings, in between election cycles and so forth. And people are too afraid to do it most of the time.
And I think you make a good point. It has to be aimed at lawmakers as much as anyone else. I feel like the public is ahead of lawmakers here for the very good reason that when you're in government and an eye-popping amount of money is talked about, you think about, well, how do we make sure this is fair? How can we put a spin on this? How can we? And we forget what people know, which is that when you owe somebody money, you don't get to tell them what they're going to do with it. Right. So I think this is one of those things where actually the kitchen table talk should be adopted by the government on like a budget.
It's sort of the history of this country in terms of austerity and other forms of starving people of everything. Let's just pivot for a second because there's on a completely different subject, but I know both of you have a lot of thoughts about this, destructive in different ways. The Lincoln Project is under fire right now. I knew you were going to hit it.
What's the Lincoln Project?
I hated them before it was cool.
I know. I knew you did. The Lincoln Project was the group formed little more than a year ago by a band of anti-Trump Republicans is facing calls to shut down amid allegations of a toxic and abusive culture at the organization. So just as a reminder to folks who are not following the consultant industrial complex the way, say, Arun and I do for sport, the Lincoln Project they did these beautiful ads, right? Anti-Trump ads, raised a lot of money off of it from Democrats. And many folks afterwards thought, okay, well, they're going to now use this money and these lists and this data to pull Democrats away, maybe? I don't know what their strategy is. But what kills me about this is it's the cultural issue that breaks apart the Lincoln Project, not the fact that it's corrupt. I mean, arguably corrupt. I shouldn't say that. It's not like legally corrupt. Unfortunately, this is all very
at
legal.
best ineffective and at worst corrupt. We'll just say it's somewhere in that spectrum.
I think that's fair.
So I mean, what want another one? They'll just start another one. Like someone else will start one. It doesn't have to be the Lincoln Project. They'll start something else. No,
but it won't have Trump. So I do think that, yes, it sucks when you only can get Capone on tax fraud or whatever. And certainly I don't want to compare financial malfeasance to like what sounds like some serious abuse happening. But like we will take any reason to pull the Lincoln Project down because like it's Coke. The next thing will be RC. Like it just will not be the same. It will not be infused with that anti-Trump magic. It will not be welcomed into the resistance.com, like whatever it all is. So I feel pretty good about this one collapsing, even knowing that, as you say, the space will be filled up with more folks.
Why are they so dangerous? What is it about them that really gets under people's skin?
Well, I mean, what's so dangerous for me is that people who loved the commercials thought that because they were anti-Trump, that they were somehow good. That's a really low bar to have enough wisdom to despise Donald Trump. And I think people were so starved for someone who weren't Democrats to say what was so obvious that they gave them a lot more credit than they deserved, particularly since the high production value and the cleverness of their commercials. People who were unfamiliar with the lay of the land gave them a lot more credit than they deserved. And that's very troubling because they never opposed his agenda for ridiculous tax cuts for the rich or hyper-conservative appointments to the judiciary. And those are the most dangerous things structurally and in the short term and long term for people who liked the commercials because they associated all those bad things with the best villain there is, which, was Donald Trump. But my enemy's enemy is not necessarily my friend.
No, you're right. And the heart of the message is what's wrong, which is the Lincoln Project says loud and clear with one voice, America is already great. That is what it's here to say. And it's a very seductive message, especially, right. For, more well-off Democrats, maybe folks like that. This is a very seductive message that means that a lot of work that we all know needs to be done doesn't necessarily need to be done right away.
And they were, the reality is it was about power. They were pissed because they weren't the ones in power. They weren't part of Trump's inner circle. They were the Bush people. They were they were the Bush people. They were the CIA Bush people, and they were the Bush senior and presidency people. They were some of the Reagan
and
people.
very much the military-industrial complex mouthpiece in Washington.
Right. And, American exceptionalism transcends party, right? There are a lot of people who want to believe in American exceptionalism and American greatness because of the promise it holds perhaps for them and their families. Like, why am I working so hard in the only country I know if it's a civilization in decline at best, right? That's a tough pill to swallow if you've been raised to believe everything else, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum. So in a way, it's an interesting lure to bring people into because there are people who are slightly left of center who may believe in American exceptionalism because they have no point of reference and the rhetoric works, it doesn't just work on the right. And we have to question those narratives, right? Pulling yourselves up by your bootstraps, which we saw a little parody about, right? That was Horatio Algiers, who was a second generation Harvard graduate. So he pulled himself up by his own Ferragamos. We have to understand who creates these stories.
Okay, so on a similar topic, I think it's this one is the story that really got me because for folks who watch the show, you're aware of this. I've been, for the last few years doing a lot of work on the island of Puerto Rico, working on, I was there reporting after the storm. And I when I was there in 2018, at that point, I was covering these guys, the cryptocurrency guys who decided, they started doing this before, to be fair, they were doing this before the storm because of the tax policies in Puerto Rico. They decided to go and move to the island. And of course, after the storm, a whole other form of the cryptocurrency guys went to the island and just started buying up the island, like whatever they could get away with because of these two acts, Act 20 and 22, which are extraordinary tax breaks. And what was so egregious about this is happening as hundreds of thousands, and it's well over 1 million now, of Puerto Ricans left the island because they didn't have power or water or pharmaceuticals. And these billionaires and cryptocurrency entrepreneurs were like, let me go there. So this guy, Logan Paul, I don't know if you know who he is. I wish I didn't know who he was.
I have a son. Yeah.
You have a son. Oh no, get him away from it. Get him away from it. Logan Paul had a couple of controversies. One was because he went to this suicide forest in Japan and filmed it. That was a few years ago. And then more recently, he was caught looting and charged. I don't know if we have that article to put up there. He was charged with looting a Phoenix mall, a Scottsdale mall during BLM. It says Jake Paul, but it's Logan Paul. Maybe that's his.
There's a brother. I think
there's a brother.
One of them is worse than the other one. Yeah, I forget which is which.
Okay, so Jake, I think, was charged. I don't know if Logan was. Anyways, Logan has announced. This just drives me crazy, but it's about a bigger story here. He's announced he's moving to the island of Puerto Rico. Can we play that clip? It's it's the one. Yeah, the next. There you go.
Moving to Puerto Rico. I was there this past week, kind of scouting it out. I've been fiending for a change. I thought it was more third world. So I feel like people are wondering why Puerto Rico, right? Yeah. Like how random.
Yeah.
Taxes. It's one vertical.
Yeah.
It's one.
It's one vertical.
It's a big one.
Mel, I don't care. I don't care, Mel. I don't care, Mel. I need friends.
Influencer, 25-year influencer has, well, it's moving too fast. I can't translate that fast for everybody. Anyways, he's, that's good enough. We can cut there. So this guy is a huge influencer, has this show that I think the YouTube show, like the episode that he just did, got like 1.5 million views. This is horrible. I mean, this is why this is the last colony. They're taxed in and out. The people are fleeing the island. They can't afford to live there. They didn't have, speaking of not having power, some parts of the island didn't have power for a year. And then you've got this guy who's a white bro, moving and signaling to other people, come to the island that we're going to continue to colonize. But this is just so emblematic of like what's going on right now. Rabb?
It's like folks saying, I'm leaving and I'm going to Canada. Only far worse, right?
It's like, but people of color.
Right, exactly. It's like, oh yeah, we're happy to have you because you're American, and we can go wherever we want. It's a very settler mentality. It is just an extension of elitist white privilege. It's pretty deplorable, and all of these policies were created for people like him to to just continue taking advantage. I mean, that's what public policy. That's why we need to talk about public policy. It's not a coincidence. These choices are made to maximize the economic benefit and security of individuals who are the most privileged. And there's a class analysis, obviously, certainly a racial analysis, and this is not anomalous, right? When I look at my ancestors and my ancestors who were owned by some of my ancestors, I see the land grabs in new territories. These were territories like Georgia. They were doing land lotteries after the American Revolution, and they're giving away 200-acre parcels that are still in the families of the white enslavers. And when they sold them and they kept moving west, they accrued more wealth at the expense of the Black folk who worked that land, who created that financial wealth. So all of this is born out of really racist public policy. And it's, if only we had more independent media folks like you to reach wider audiences to have these conversations, because this is not what is really going to be discussed by corporate media. It's not in their best interest. And like you said, it's not their business model.
Well, and what's really infuriating about this, and I know you can speak to this, Arun, because this is happening in Greece, for instance, Spain, Portugal. but specifically Greece and Puerto Rico, is that there is an extraordinary amount of debt that is owed on the island of Puerto Rico, in which those tax dollars would be real mighty important to use if you want to keep that debt and not erase it, which, I think the elimination of debt would be preferable. But not to mention that the money being paid into it is going to bondholders who are being represented on the fiscal oversight board of this island. And they're saying, oh, welcome in these like young crypto bros to buy up all the land, the homes that people have abandoned because they just literally leave their keys in the car at the airport and say, and write their banks and say, keys to the house are in the car on the wheel, take the house. I mean, that's what's happening. That's the reality of what's happening. It happened in Greece as well. A little bit different, but
look, and I don't want to get out over the handlebars here because, as you very well know, having spent time on the island, like statehood is not a clear-cut issue. It is not.
Statehood is right. Let me make it very clear so everyone knows. Statehood party is the right-wing racist party. So for folks who don't understand this, the neoliberals on the island are even against statehood. It is a right-wing racist, and the reason why it became a Democratic issue is because Tom Perez cut a deal with statehood contingents to get the vote for the DNC chairmanship. It is a right-wing, like you go to the island, you say you're for statehood, they're going to be like, oh, you're part of the racist religious right? It's the Ted Cruz party. Sorry, I don't mean to.
No, but it's not clear. If you thought about it, you'd think it was like probably a movement, nice kids, Bernie Kratz, they're probably the one, and it's just not what it is. But so that is not what I'm talking about, but there is an issue of self-determination here. Yes. And there is, on top of the moral and racial and historical issues that Rep. Rabb is bringing up, there is also a constitutional issue, which is like, what do you do when you do these land grabs? You end up with people who aren't represented, and that's not the way our system is even supposed to work at its best, which it rarely does. But here we're not even starting from the beginning of that. And so you see what happens when people don't have any representation. There's no one, even forget the solutions on Puerto Rico. People don't even know what it is. They don't know if it's part of America. Our former president Trump, seemed extremely confused on the issue of the status.
Well, he knew. He went there. He tried to get a hotel. He was very familiar with what was going on. He just chose not to care.
It's just, the amount, I think people do not realize that this is a place that is our country, is our responsibility. These are our fellow citizens. And we better start treating them like it. Like, it is just unbelievable. What happens and what is happening. And I don't see an easy solution to it. And I don't see where the help is going to come from. And I don't see what's going to stop Bitcoin billionaires from buying up the place. I don't see it. Tell me something hopeful.
I mean, they could end Act 20 and Act 22 to start with. That would be great. Eliminating debt to begin with. That would be great. But I mean, this is what it's one thing if you're going to set up these acts to bring in to bring in businesses. Like if you're going to come, basically what it is they have to live on the island for like 163 or 73 days, whatever it is, a year, live on the island, buy property. But there's really not much. I mean, there's a couple things. It's not about regenerating the island and making the island's economy self-sufficient and investing in the community so the community can build up and small business, whatever it is. They're not even bringing in big business anymore, like the pharmaceutical industry, which is problematic, but at least there's some jobs attached to it. These are just guys who want to buy. It's a real estate deal. It is. These are real estate deals. You need someone who'll
stick those things in big bills. This is how you do it when you're from Wyoming or you're from someplace else. Is a big old stimulus bill is coming through and you get it plugged in there, but Puerto Rico has no one to make that case. And
exactly.
So
right. And that's the irony, right? Because you're talking about an island that has more people than, some states that are represented in the U.S. Senate, of which, Puerto Rico is not, right? Way more, right? Yeah. And you look at the 57 senators who voted for impeachment. I think there's 75, they represent 75 million more than the 43 who didn't. So when we talk about representation and a participatory democracy, I mean, these are idle words representing an enfeebled institution that does not do justice for all the people it's supposed to represent, which includes our territories. If it's not a U.S. territory, that's one thing. We could say we owe more to the nation of Haiti, which I believe we do. I mean, we've wrecked so many economies and societies with our racist imperialist foreign policy. But when you're talking about your own U.S. territories, we have a responsibility. And, it is deplorable for all the reasons you mentioned.
It's become an economic opportunity for some of the most elite people on this planet to exploit because of the status of the island. And, and just as my gentle, regular reminder to folks, the island's only representative of Congress right now who does not have a vote is a Republican, is a Trump Republican, was part of Trump for 2020 official campaign. The current governor is a Republican. The last governor was a Republican, and he had to step down. So this is not an island that you suddenly think, if it's a state, there's going to be 2 senators and a Congress member that are Democrats, because you've had more Republicans as governors of Puerto Rico than you've had Democrats. So this is, I believe there's a bill, Nydia Velázquez, Representative Nydia Velázquez and AOC have a bill in Congress right now to set up a convention to really, I think partly to educate people about this issue, because it has become a hot issue in which people want the island of Puerto Rico to become a state. And that in itself is very colonial, to just assume that they want to be a state. It's an island that speaks only Spanish for the most part. I think 30% are bilingual. Government is conducted in Spanish. They have their own culture. They say it's their own country on the island. But furthermore, I think this guy, Logan Paul, is just emblematic of like white privilege and colonial mentality that's infused, as you say, Rabb, infused into our culture, and we're indoctrinated and don't even know it half the time. So, all right, guys, always a pleasure. Arun Chaudhary from Berlin, Rabb, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. Thanks for the rapid fire panel today. I'm going to do some shout outs to folks, and I got to head out. I apologize, everybody, for the shorter show today, but thank you to everyone. We will see you next week, guys. Oh, wait. And can I say this? Next Wednesday, Arun is going to be filling in for me. I'm not going to be able to make the show, so he's going to test the hosting position.
Awesome.
It'll be good. Yeah. I can't wait. All right. Some shout outs, guys. All right. Hey, if you don't already know, go check out our friends over at Clickbaity Political Thirst Trap. Go check out their YouTube. You just put that in the search bar and you can find them. Dear friends, they've been great. I've been on the show. Really enjoy their conversations. Fiery, spicy, great conversations. Go be, I feel like we're allies of their show and vice versa. So go check out Clickbaity Political Thirst Trap. They just launched. And then Prairie Fire Kowalski from Nebraska. Thank you for the coffee. Appreciate it. John F. McDropout. If Trump has taught us anything, it might be that it's hard to press a president who is rambling and incoherent. Fair point. Professor Harvey Kaye, who's on the show today, also was in the live chat. So thank you for joining before and after the show. And Mario Q, thank you for working the algorithms. We do appreciate that. And all of our mods on YouTube, Bob C, Chokin, The Orb, and Chuck Diesel. And over at Twitch, Dorian Sapiens, A Difficult Truth, Our Means, Nug Wrangler. Thank you for keeping these live chats troll-free. And as we said before, mods, we got a couple of emails from you. Thank you. Send us your addresses so we can send you some swag, a mug, a bag, some stickers. Send it over at thenomikishow@gmail.com. All right, everybody, I'm out. Thank you for everything. Stay in solidarity. We'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place.